Howdy my totally as always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. And today we're going to be talking about Remedy Entertainment. Yes, this will be a fun one. So Remedy, if you're not familiar with them, is a studio based in Finland that produces really cinematic, story and character driven action adventure games. Over the years, many years now, they've actually made a ton of different games, whether it was Max Payne, Quantum Break, Alan Wake, and now Alan Wake 2. And so, you know, with the release of Alan Wake 2, I thought, hey, let's talk about all of Remedy Entertainment's games. You know, I talked about them a couple years ago, but I think it's time to do a redo. It's time to reassess my thoughts, see how these games are, how my list looks now with Alan Wake 2 and the disaster that was Crossfire X's single player. People really love the games that this studio makes, not just for, you know, their stories and their characters, but just how out there they are, especially games like Alan Wake, like Control, and especially Alan Wake 2, how just quirky and weird and different they are from the norm, with usually some pretty solid third-person shooter gameplay. And so today we're going to be ranking / reviewing all of their games. We're going to be looking at them worst to best, stacking them up against each other, seeing how they all line up, which is the worst, which is the best, which are totally worth playing, and which are best ignored. And you know what, these games being so story focused, I just want to put it out there, there will be no spoilers in this video. I will go over the very initial premise, and that is it. As always, this is totally just my opinion. You know, there might be some really hot takes here. There might even be some really cold takes. I've been a big fan of Remedy for a long time now. I remember playing Max Payne way back when, and I've played all their games at release. Like, I just genuinely really do like all of Remedy's games to an extent, and just thought I'd share my opinion and yeah, go over all of these games. So let me know down below what your favorite is, maybe some fun memories you have with Alan Wake. Are you getting Alan Wake 2? Let me know down below. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe. We got the super thanks and the Patreon going on. Any support is greatly appreciated. So let's just get right into it. Which of Remedy Entertainment's games is the weakest? Well, it's probably pretty obvious, but it's Crossfire X, and it's just kind of the weakest, worst by default, since you can't actually play it anymore. Let's give you a little history lesson. So in 2022, a multiplayer shooter known as Crossfire X released for the Xbox and PC. It was a primarily multiplayer shooter, but it did have a single-player campaign. That single-player campaign, it was actually developed by Remedy Entertainment. They did it as contract work, and they made a single player for what was clearly a multiplayer focused shooter. Well, it turns out the game was just a massive flop pretty much in every regard. Critically, commercially, player wise, the game was a total bust, and they actually discontinued it. But interestingly enough, they didn't just continue the multiplayer, they discontinued the entire product. Yeah, even the supposedly offline single player that requires no internet connection, nope, it's gone too. You can't buy it, you can't play it. If you didn't beat it before it got discontinued, they took it away from you. No one gets to play this now. Well, it doesn't sound like we were really missing much. I did not try it. It looked just terrible, and according to everyone online, it was terrible, so I guess I'm not really missing anything here. But yeah, by default, Crossfire X is their worst game since it's not available to play anymore, but I would be genuinely shocked if this game would be any higher on the list, even if we could play it nowadays. But, I mean, you can't, so that's enough about this. And here we have Remedy Entertainment's first title, Death Rally. Now, I'm sure when you think of Remedy, you think of Alan Wake or Max Payne or some kind of really narrative-focused game. In this game, you can take one look at it and you can clearly see that's not it. See, it was after this game that they took that philosophy and that approach. But hey, don't get it twisted. Death Rally is still a classic. The original came out in the 90s, but it was remade in the early 2010s. That's the version I've always played. So what even is this game? This is a top-down racing / car combat game where the objective really is to win the race. Along the way, though, you will get weapons and items that you can destroy the other cars with to, you know, win the race. When it comes to a story or characters or anything like that, it is not the focus of this game. There is an initial setup where it's about you trying to really win the Death Rally, and that's about as far as it goes. It's very basic in the story department, but gameplay wise, yeah, it is a racing game, and you know, it takes a second to get used to the controls, but I adjusted pretty quick. And then it's a car combat racing game. You know, there isn't a lot of these. There was more of them in the 90s when this came out, but nowadays it feels like there's very few, and it's okay. This game doesn't do anything terrible or bad, but I wouldn't particularly say it does anything all that well either. You know, the controls, once you get used to them, they're fine. They're nothing special. The cars feel okay, and the physics, again, feel fine enough. The items and weapons you can use are kind of cool, but I wouldn't say they're particularly all that satisfying. The track design really is nothing special. It feels very generic and just kind of by the numbers, and the general gameplay loop, yeah, it's just alright. I wouldn't say I particularly had a ton of fun here. I was challenged. This game is actually challenging, which is a nice touch. And there are a few little wrinkles here and there, like how you can upgrade your car to make it better, and you can actually bribe other racers to like throw the race. That's an interesting touch, but these wrinkles don't really change the core gameplay all that much. Look, when this game came out, it's clear what its competition was. It was Carmageddon, and Carmageddon wipes the fucking floor with this game. Carmageddon's a great game. This, it's like okay at best, you know. I'm sure a bunch of people really love it and have some fond memories with it, but I just never really cared all that much for it. It's okay, but you could definitely do a lot better. If you really are interested in the game though, it is dirt cheap. You can get it for under $1 on a Steam sale. I think I got it for like 45 cents or something ridiculous like that, so at least it's affordable. And here we have Alan Wake American Nightmare releasing in 2012. So this game was like a spin-off to the original Alan Wake. You'll see the original Alan Wake soon enough, but this game has really nothing to do with Alan Wake actually, outside of Alan himself. You know, he's here and that's really the only connection to the other Alan Wake games. It is a standalone story. And the story really reflects that as well. It acts like it's an episode of a show known as Night Springs, which is basically the Twilight Zone. Like, tell me this isn't the Twilight Zone. It is incredibly similar to Twilight Zone, and it's about Alan going up against his evil doppelganger, Mr. Scratch, and that's all I'm going to say for the story. Look, tonally, this is very different from just about everything else that Remedy has made. And I think the game does have a really great premise. Unfortunately, I don't think it really takes advantage of that premise. The story and the setting and the characters are just all okay. It doesn't feel like it really gets past that initial premise, and I'll just get right into it. The reason it doesn't is because the game is so short. Like, that is the biggest issue with American Nightmare just immediately that is worth bringing up. The game is under 2 hours long. And because of this, I can't really get invested into the characters or the world or the setting or anything because it's over like that. When it comes to the gameplay, it's interesting. You're dropped into this kind of like pseudo open world and are given objectives to do, and you just kind of travel from one area to the next, usually doing something and then coming across some people that want to destroy you or eat you or whatever these fucking shadow things do. I don't know, I think one of them said something about giving you a rim job, so yeah, you're going to want to kill them. And so the way the combat works in this game is basically the same as the original Alan Wake, where you need to just shine light on them to expose them, and then you can just gun them down. It really feels the same as the first Alan Wakes, and it's actually a pretty decent third-person shooter. They even introduced some new weapons like a submachine gun and a nail gun. I think the shooting and the combat in general is just as good, if not even better, than the original Alan Wakes. It's very solid, it feels nice, and the flow is decent. Unfortunately, the game just ends. You know, you finally get into a groove, get a nice flow going, and then the game's just over, and it's like, huh, that could have been so much more. And the game even ends just kind of abruptly. I won't spoil exactly why, but the game kind of has a Groundhog Day theme going on, and you'll end up going to the same areas more than once. And it's like, dude, the game is already like an hour and a half long, and you have me going to the same area more than once? Like, come on now. You're really reusing content in a game that isn't even 2 hours long. Like, seriously, come on. At least presentation wise, the game is pretty good. Looks just as good as Alan Wake, if not even better. The presentation, really solid. The cutscenes, voice acting, the storytelling, the little that's in there, it's all very well done. I just wish there was more, but this game could have been like a $5 DLC for the original, but it is a standalone and it's getting treated like its own game, and yeah, it's just okay. Fans of the original Alan Wake should totally play it, but everyone else, you could pretty much skip it. And here we have the underappreciated, underrated Quantum Break releasing in 2016. You know, I remember when this game came out, Microsoft was really pushing hard for it, but since the game's release, I honestly never heard that much about it, except when people were talking about Remedy themselves and saying how this game was underrated, and here I am also to sing the game's praises and say it's underrated. The premise is very interesting. It's about Jack Joyce, who basically gets time-traveling powers after an experiment goes wrong, and it's about him going up against his former friend, with, you know, a bunch of gloom and doom and death and end of the world in the background, you know, the typical. But in all seriousness, I think the story of Quantum Break is actually incredibly well done. It's interesting. It's a really different take on time travel that, you know, a lot of other media does not really focus on. It focuses on the negative side that I think a lot of people don't even realize. I myself didn't, and I think it's a unique tale. It was just kind of a fresh take to see a game have time travel and take it so serious. Like, that really is the central plot theme, the central mechanic of the game is time travel, and I think they actually really nailed that aspect. I think the game has A little bit of a slow pace, especially at the start, but it really does have some characters with a lot of depth, and the ending was really surprising. I really do like the story, and Lance Reddick is here, so how could you really hate it? The way the game does its storytelling is really interesting also. In between chapters, you do watch like this pseudo TV show where you watch your actions come to life, basically, as it is real life. It's like a full-ass TV show with the actors playing the characters that they do in the game, and you even get to make choices in the game as Paul Serene, the antagonist, and it'll affect the TV show. So there's a couple different outcomes you can have here, and it's just a really interesting way of doing storytelling. And the production values are really good, actually. Like, the acting's decent, everything seems pretty solid. I know plenty of people didn't like this. They're like, I don't want to watch this TV show for like 2 hours and then play the game for 30 minutes. I want to just play the game. And fair point, it is a video game, but I enjoyed it for what it was. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, because this is a game that you play, it is a pretty run-of-the-mill third-person shooter. For the most part, it is a standard third-person shooter where you have a couple special abilities to help you throughout. These special abilities obviously being the time manipulation, like you can slow down time so you boost all over, you can throw up a shield to stop bullets, you can cause little explosions, and these add some wrinkles to the third-person shooter gameplay to make it more interesting and just have more going on, because the actual shooting itself, like, it's okay. I wouldn't say any of the weapons feel particularly great, or the gunplay is amazing, or the enemy AI is great, or the game challenged me all that much, but it's thanks to the time manipulation that I wasn't bored or like, oh, I don't want to get into another shooting gallery, but I'd say the third-person shooting is okay. But when you aren't dashing around shooting the place up, there is some minor platforming here and puzzle solving involving the time manipulation. I didn't really care much for either of these. The platforming is really basic, and the time manipulation, like when it's actually in effect with the puzzles and the physics, I just found it incredibly janky, and I would just end up dying like really easily from just basic stuff. It just felt really undercooked, half-baked, and it feels like there's a bunch of like half ideas here without them really committing to anything. Like, it feels like this was thrown in for variety's sake rather than being a focus of the game. The focus is clearly the story and the characters and the live action stuff, and I think all of that is very good. That's what kept me going, that's what kept me interested, that's what I think is the best part of Quantum Break: the story, the characters, the world, how the game progresses, and the live action stuff. I think all of that's good, and that's really what I can recommend about Quantum Break. If you're looking for a good, different story with solid characters, and you're okay with the live action episodes where you won't play the game for 20-30 minutes, sometimes more at a time, then yeah, I think Quantum Break is worth playing. If you're here just for the gameplay, you're going to find a decent third-person shooter that works but doesn't really excel at much. But in the end, I can still recommend the game. I think the game is still good, and yeah, I do think it is underrated. I didn't hear many people talk about it then, and I certainly don't hear many people talk about it now, so go check it out. And here we have Max Payne 2 releasing in 2003. This game is a shocker follow-up to the original Max Payne. Ooh, I know you didn't see that one coming. And this game really sees our hard-boiled cop going up against this mysterious group known as the Cleaners, but he's not alone this time. He has a partner helping him known as Mona Sachs. The story, I think it's solid enough in this game. I don't think it's as good as the first one. It's not as emotional and personal as the first games, but I do like the story. I think it's good. The Cleaners are interesting, and Mona Sachs is a decent character too. And the storytelling is very similar to the first games with like the comic panels. I like the story. When it comes to the gameplay, they really looked at the original and really just kind of replicated it, where you're just dropped into these environments and told to shoot basically everything that moves. You'll get plenty of weapons to kill plenty of people. You'll be running around in slow-mo doing a bunch of Matrix shit, whether you're jumping around, moving in slow-mo, doing these sick-ass spins. There's plenty of people to kill and plenty of cool moves to pull off. In fact, Max Payne 2 just kind of goes apeshit with the slow-mo. It lets you stay in slow-mo for so long. You can do just a ton of stuff in this game in slow-mo. You could do more than you could in the first game. Like, I was like, oh my god, I feel so fucking cool. Like, the gunplay is great. The combat in general is pretty good. The guns feel nice. It's satisfying when you're in slow-mo. The enemies go flying into the air. The AI ain't half bad, and the level design is decent. Unfortunately, you do go to the same areas more than once in this game, which is a bummer since it isn't that long, and there is a part where you play as Mona Sachs, and I've just never really cared for this section, but it's not too long. And speaking of the game's length, unfortunately, the game isn't very long. It's the shortest of the Max Payne games, clocking in at just about 4 hours, and this game, it really left me wanting more. Like, it could have totally used like another hour, and it wouldn't have felt repetitive at all. That, and that they reuse levels, kind of like American Nightmare, to the point where I'm like, dude, the game isn't that long and you're reusing shit, but hey, It's not the end of the world. The game is still a great third-person shooter. You can beat it in a sitting, no problem, and have an absolute blast. It's a really solid time, and I have no problem recommending it, especially if you like third-person shooters or Max Payne. I think you can't really go wrong with it, and it's getting remade with the first one, so I mean, that's always a big bonus, right? It's going to have a remake, it's going to be all fancy and shiny and all that. No, Max Payne 2, it's a solid one. And here we have Control releasing in 2019. This is one of Remedy's weirder games. The game takes heavy inspiration from SCP Foundation, and the game stars Jesse Faden, and it primarily revolves around the Federal Bureau of Control. And it's about them investigating events that just really shouldn't be possible, but here we are. And once Jesse shows up, yeah, shit goes south real quick. And I'll just say this story is weird. It is kind of hard to follow at first, which is clearly the point, but the story is just weird in this game. I was never huge on it, but I can appreciate what they're trying to do. It is a different story from all the other Remedy stories, and I think the initial premise is actually really gripping. It's really mysterious. You don't know exactly what's happening, and you really just, want to find out what's going to happen next. That initial couple hours, I think the storytelling and the story in general is really good. But as you continue, the story becomes, way more convoluted. It gets even harder to follow, and it feels like you're so far away from what the game even started with story-wise, to the point where I'm just like, man, we really are far away. And then by the end of it, it feels like the story just kind of fizzles out, and the ending kind of sucks. It leads into the DLC. Yeah, if you want like the full story, you gotta buy and play the DLC, which I'm never gonna be a fan of that. The story and the characters, yeah, I think it's just alright. At least the presentation is really great. The main actress, Courtney Hope, as Jessie, I think she really rocks it. One of the best of the entire series. She's really great. The acting is good. The game looks great, has a solid presentation, good frame rate. All of that is really good. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it is also a third-person shooter. But there is so much more to the combat than shooting. Yes, you do have a weapon that you can customize and shoot enemies with, but Jesse has a bunch of powers, and these powers are way cooler than like the shit you get in Quantum Break. Don't get me wrong, Quantum Break gets some cool powers, but this game, you can pick shit up and just throw it around like it's psyops. You can take control of enemies, and man, the combat is actually quite fun. Picking stuff up and throwing it at the enemies just kind of never gets old. It's incredibly impactful, it's satisfying, stuff has weight to it. I like the physics, and I really did enjoy the combat here. I think it is very solid. The structure of this game is actually very different from the other Remedy games. All the games up until this point were very linear. There's really nothing to comment on with the structure. This game, though, it is different. You're dropped into this kind of like pseudo open environment where you can explore freely around. There's side quests and everything, and you don't have to just go through this linear corridor shooter, kind of like, Quantum Break, Max Payne, etc. This game even has Metroidvania elements where you'll get powers and you can go back to earlier areas to access new stuff. And I think the level design is solid enough. They keep things fresh and engaging with new environments and challenges. And, I might have gotten lost once or twice, but that's probably a skill issue. When it comes to the gameplay of Control, I think it's one of the best Remedy has done. And I think Control, it's a pretty solid game. I wish I enjoyed the story a little bit more. Otherwise, this could very well be my favorite Remedy game. But as it stands, I think it's a great game that's totally worth playing. And if you like psyops or love physics-based games, this is a must-play. Picking shit up and throwing it, it really just never gets old. And here we have the original Max Payne coming out in 2001. It's crazy to think that the game is not only 20 years old, but it's still this good. The original Max Payne holds up incredibly well and is still a very solid third-person shooter with a really gripping story. The story follows our hard-boiled detective cop Max Payne, and he just goes through a lot of shit, and that's all I really want to say. The story has just so many emotions, whether it's hate, anger, sadness. Like, the story is really well done in Max Payne. It's really tragic and sad. Like, Max really deals with depression because of what happens to him and his loved ones. Like, the story, it's really well done in this game. I really think the characters are good, and the storytelling is, again, the comic book style. And, it might look outdated nowadays, and the faces might look a little goofy, but I really think the story is just excellent. And the voice acting, and again, just the emotion that this story has, it's really cinematic. And while it doesn't have the most interesting world when comparing to, like, Control or Alan Wake, I still think the story, it's really good in this game. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it's a very solid, refined third-person shooter that it was great then, it's great now. I'd argue it's one of the very best third-person shooters of the 2000s. You know, Max Payne was really the game that took the whole Matrix craze and put it into a video game where you're jumping around in slow-mo, killing dudes in slow-mo, looking awesome. And yeah, the game still holds up. The gunplay is incredibly well done. It's satisfying. There's a bunch of different weapons. The enemies die in satisfying ways, and it's just a blast, man. Every time I've come back to this game, I'm always so impressed with just how much fun the gunplay is. The combat feels really nice, and the game puts you in plenty of different interesting environments that are all nice to go through. This game has a great pace to it, a great flow, and it has a good length. It's not too short and it's not too long either. It's incredibly replayable, and I have zero problem recommending this game. Like, I think it's one of the finest third-person shooters from the era. Like, play a bunch of shooters from like the early 2000s and tell me if they hold up as well as Max Payne 1 does. I'd be surprised to see how many do, because this game is awesome. I think the game is great, and I have zero problem saying go check it out. It is also getting remade with the second one, but who knows when we'll actually see those. Let's hope the remake is just as good as the original, because the original, it still slaps. And so here we have the original Alan Wake releasing all the way back in 2010, and you know, I love the original Alan Wake. Like, it really felt like Remedy just fired off on all cylinders with the original Alan Wake and just had an absolute slam dunk here, especially in the story department. You know, it's about the titular character Alan Wake. He's a writer and he has writer's block and decides that a vacation might make things better, so he goes to Washington. But the main plot sees Alan investigating the disappearance of his wife and going to some really dark places. Literally really dark places, like darker than my asshole. Yours too, nobody's safe here, but the story of Alan Wake is exceptional. Like, I really dig the story here, whether it's the characters like Alan himself or some of the side characters, the world of Alan Wake, the atmosphere this game has, which is really good, the Twin Peaks vibes, and just all the shit that goes down here with some really awesome twists and a crazy ending. Yeah, Alan Wake has a great story, great characters, the presentation is super solid, the writing, the acting, it's all really well done. And here I am 10 plus years later, still going off about how good the story of Alan Wake is. Like, I really do love the story. I love the pacing of the story. It's all really good. When it comes to the gameplay, it's an interesting twist on a third-person shooter. See, Alan isn't fighting some military dudes or some creature in the woods. No, he's fighting these like shadow things which look like people, but they need to be exposed to light. And so to do so, you'll have a flashlight and eventually like a fucking fog light to expose these creatures to the light so you can blast them away with a gun. If they're in the darkness, they're impervious to everything, and so the gameplay really revolves around you lighting their ass up and then blowing their ass up, and it's actually a really satisfying gameplay loop. The guns feel nice, the shooting feels nice, and lighting them up even feels nice, which is a good touch, and I enjoy the combat loop. It's unique. It's not exactly the most in-depth, but I do think it is fun, it is aged well, and it still feels nice, and the game puts you in plenty of different interesting scenarios to keep things fresh. You know, you're not just running through the same hallways doing this over and over again. The game actually does have some scenarios that are different. There's actually some variety here is what I'm trying to say. There's even a part where you drive a car. There's even some platforming. There's some puzzles, and all of that is decent enough, but the core gameplay, yeah, it's shooting shit with the light, and I think it's solid enough. Does it reinvent the wheel? No, but it's still a very solid, fun third-person shooter with the occasional scare and spooky atmosphere, all wrapped up in this really gripping narrative. Like, I really do love the story, and I have zero problem recommending the game and the DLC, especially if you like a good story or a third-person shooter. Like, when they announced Alan Wake 2, I was so fucking excited because the original Alan Wake really just hit home for me. And speaking of Alan Wake 2, here we have the newly released Alan Wake 2 finally coming out here in 2023, and man, Alan Wake 2 is awesome. It is not only Remedy's strangest game, but in my opinion, it is their best game. It's like they took the original Alan Wake and really realized its full potential and just went balls to the walls in just about every aspect to create one of the most unique experiences I've ever had with a video game. And as a quick reminder, all the video footage is from the very early hours of the game, as I really did not want to spoil anything with this game. This is not a game where you want anything spoiled. Now, Alan Wake 2, I know this game is clearly not everyone's cup of tea. I've talked to plenty of people that have not been big fans of this game, but this game really hit hard for me. The story takes place after Alan Wake 1, and without spoiling Alan Wake 1 as much as I can, I'll just say Alan's in the dark place, and it's been a long time, and an FBI agent named Saga shows up to Bright Falls calls to investigate some murders and some shit goes down, but not just some shit, some really heavy duty shit. We're talking like dinosaur level turds out here, some real ass shit. The story is absolutely the main focus here. You know, the story was a huge focus of the first game, but here it's like this is what the game is. It's all about the story, the atmosphere, the characters, the writing, solving this mystery. Like, it's all about the story, and I freaking love it. I absolutely love it. I think this game is expertly well written. It has kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time, kept me constantly guessing. I did not find the story predictable. I was engaged. I was really into it. And it really just blows my mind with how unpredictable this game is. The twists and turns are in directions that I didn't even know were possible. Like, the story is one of the very best stories I've experienced in a video game, not just for 2023, but ever. Like, it is so good. The characters are so well written. They have so much depth. There's a lot to them, more than just Alan. All of the characters actually have a lot to them. And then on top of the fantastic story, characters, plot, writing, etc., we have the atmosphere. The atmosphere in Alan Wake 2 is so well done. This shit could win awards. Like, if every game had an atmosphere even a third as good as this, I'd get my 350 from the Loch Ness Monster. Like, the atmosphere is just so good. It's tense, it's dark, it's depressing, it's engaging, but most of all, it's engrossing. I was so engrossed in this game's atmosphere, like very few games have hit me like this game did. And what they've created here is nothing short of a masterclass. But then you have the actual gameplay. This is a game that you do actually play. The focus might very well be the mystery and the story and the atmosphere and all that, but there is actually a game to play here, and it is much more of a survival horror game than the first game ever was. Don't get me wrong, Alan Wake had its scary moments, and it had plenty of spooky moments, but I would not say that's a survival horror game. This game is much more like a survival horror game. If I could compare it to anything or be reductive, I'd say it's probably most comparable to like RE7 and 8 fused with Alan Wake 1's gameplay. You know, you're still fighting the shadows, they're still trying to give you a rim job, but there's a lot of exploration and survival elements here. If you haven't noticed, there's two playable characters, Saga Anderson and Alan Wake, and you know, playing as these two characters from a gameplay perspective, it isn't all that different. They control the same, they have the same abilities, but what you're actually doing as each character is different. Saga's is much more of a detective game. You know, you're actually investigating, you're deducing, putting things together. Alan is very much trying to solve the puzzle that is the Dark World and get out of it. But both characters do have a fair amount of problem solving and puzzle solving. This game is way more puzzles than I was expecting. I was kind of surprised. You know, the first Alan Wake had a few here and there, but this game, there's tons of puzzles here, and I actually thought most of them were pretty cleverly designed, and I did enjoy them. They're not like stupid difficult, but they're not also dumbass easy. That probably made no sense. What I'm saying is they're a nice balance when it comes to the difficulty. I enjoyed the puzzles, and as you're exploring around these relatively larger environments that you'll go back to many times, you'll find a bunch of secrets, items to pick up for your limited inventory, shadows to get into fights with, and just continuing along with your leads. And I think the way all of this comes together along with the pacing is pretty great. I will admit it is slower, it is not as straightforward, and does not have the same pace or style as the first Alan Wake. You know, a lot of this game is spent exploring around. You do a hell of a lot more exploring than getting into fights in this game. If you jump in here expecting to fight just shadows left and right or these dark creatures all the time, no, you're going to be disappointed, because most of the time you are investigating, you are exploring, you are looking in every nook and cranny, and it just has a slower pace to it. But I really enjoy that slower pace. I want to learn about this world, and when you eventually do get into fights, it is meaningful. The third person shooting in this game, it's not all that different from the first game. You know, you really just shine the light on the enemy and then blast away. Obviously, there's a few variants here or there. They put you in different situations, but that's the gist of it. And I think the shooting in this game is really solid. I think it's impactful, it's heavy. It's probably the best shooting that Remedy has ever done in their games. It's really nice when you actually do get into combat. The enemies really can do a lot of damage to you, especially if they hit you really hard. Like, they can really mess up your character. However, there are plenty of recovery items in this game. Look, this isn't as stingy as some of the older RE games. This is a modern game, and they do give you plenty of health items, plenty of ammunition. As long as you do some basic exploring, I think you're going to be fine. But they really can mess you up, and I think that is really cool. And I think the survival elements are welcome. I actually enjoy them. I enjoy the item inventory management, and I think it really adds to the exploration, and it actually does create some rewards. You know, if you go out of your way to explore, do some of the optional puzzles, like, they really do reward you, which I can really appreciate here. But obviously there's two parts to survival horror, the survival and the horror part. I think the survival, it's well done. The horror, yeah, I think it's actually really well done. This is their scariest game easy. This game got me plenty of times, not just with the jump scares, but just how tense the atmosphere was. Yeah, this is a scary game. Is it crazy scary? Is it going to, make you jump out of your seat, scream a bunch of times? No, I don't think it's going to do that, but it's one of those more slow burn games that kind of gets to you over time. I think it's a scary game, and I can actually really appreciate how it is scary. I think that's really cool. And like the main reason this game is scary and that the atmosphere is so good is the presentation. The presentation, just by all accounts, is fantastic. It looks amazing. The environments look great. The character models are great. They still incorporate the real life elements, and I think it's the best that they've ever done. And the production values are just great. Like this game, it looks great, it sounds great, and it plays great. I think the game is pretty excellent all around. Is it totally perfect and the best game I've ever played? No, it's not. I have, a few issues with it. While I don't mind the slower pace of this game, replaying this game just sounds horrible. Like, it sounds incredibly boring and just kind of dull. I'm also not huge on the leveling up. This feels really shoehorned in and just kind of useless. You can level up Alan, Saga, and their guns, and I just didn't really care for this. Somehow it was worse than Control's leveling up, and I've had a few glitches here and there. I had one where I actually couldn't pick up a shotgun. It said I just didn't have the inventory for it, but I just reloaded and I was fine, but there's been a few issues. But none of these are huge game-breaking issues. Far from it. This game has so much more good that outweighs the bad. Like, no spoilers, but I'll just say, if you've played some of Remedy's older games, really any of their titles, like, the fan service and callbacks are fantastic. It's so cool. It's so great. I loved it. Like, I was smiling. I was like, ooh, I know that. And it was great stuff here. I really did like the callbacks and the throwbacks. That's all super well done, and it's super cool that it's all here. Like, it's just a miracle that this game was not only made, but as good as it is. Like, it is so good. Like, I have not felt so hooked to a game story and truly just had no idea where it was going to go in quite some time. Like, I was just so into it. I was so engaged, and again, this game, it's clearly not for everybody. Some people, it just didn't click with them, and that's a shame. But for me, this game absolutely clicked with me, and I have zero problem recommending if you like horror games, if you like survival horror games, if you're looking for something different, or you liked Alan Wake 1, then I totally recommend trying it. Do you need to play Alan Wake 1 to understand this game? I'd recommend you play Alan Wake 1, but I wouldn't say it's absolutely required. But I think most people can appreciate what this game is and just how out there it is. I really do love Remedy Entertainment. I love their style. I love their stories and games. And this really just feels like a culmination of everything. Everything they've learned, all the styles of games, all the characters, all the weird world building they've done. It's all come together for Alan Wake 2, and this is their magnum opus, at least in my opinion. So that's it for today's video. Let me know down below what you all think about Alan Wake 2, Remedy Entertainment, maybe your favorite games. If you made it to this part of the video, please like, share, subscribe, and comment Hamtaro, as in that old anime series. That means you made it. That's our code word. Thank you very much. Hope you have a wonderful night. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.